about the collisions of time. This poem, around October of 2019, I get an email from a member of a writing group I'm in, Ann Creed, who she tells me she has a friend that is named Joe Paris, and his father worked at the same ad agency in Atlanta with Joe Paris Sr. And during one of the days, one of the nights at work, when they were drinking, and they were supposed to be working on other stuff, Dickey was working on poetry. And he drops off a poem on his friend's, his co-worker's desk. And the poem is basically put away and sort of forgotten until James Dickey gets famous. And Joe writes James a letter enclosing the poem in 1973, asking James to sign the poem and send it back. And so he does, and he writes, "Dear Joe, it was wonderful to hear from you, and I'm very happy to sign the poem, which I enclose. I learned my craft among fellow workers in advertising, such as yourself, and I remember my time with you particularly as being productive, friendly, and valuable. My very best to your family and to yourself. Hang in there." Well, Joe wanted to be a writer too, and Joe never does. He ends up, like a lot of people, working in their profession and never fulfilling that creative desire. Well, this is the poem that James Dickey wrote and dropped off for Joe W. Paris. It's titled Parade, Two Things to Think About, as both of them served in World War II in the South Pacific, and both worked as ad men in the 60s. It was a glorious music poured upon us in that bright morning, and it was as though the whole dour earth were moved by those sweet sounds that played around our bodies and in motion conceived in us a love but not of loving. We might have been alone upon the sun. We were then pierced by pride that was entrancing and stood there made of sweat and steel and polish, each with his latest thought, his last thought wounding. A being in a being, the white music caught us in clouds of sound and swirled us skyward. We were aware of nothing but our fires. Then suddenly I lived beyond my breathing. Dissolved the mists of music saw beside me. Myself in such a stance in various guises. The eternal soldier, and the ground was stirring beneath my feet. The cities falling down, and madmen played gold music in our ears.
Year after I got my PhD in '75, I hung around town, continued to go to Dickeys classes, because there was nothing better in the world to do. And I took copious notes for years. I went to more than 500 classes through the 80s, because between jobs I'd always be back here. I kept an apartment on Lawrence Street for 20 years, but my rent was $50. In the beginning, and it ended up at $135. But when Maxine Dickey died, it was the afternoon that Elizabeth Bishop gave a poetry reading here at the business building. And, but so I went out to the house, and there's ongoing socializing. Jim's brother Tom came, and his wife Patsy, and Al Brazelton from Deliverance came. Jim used to tell a story about Al Brazelton. He knew he was an alcoholic when he was in his home office one day, and he looked to the side. He saw an alligator singing with the voice of Vaughn Monroe. I noticed on a coffee table near the front door a scrap of paper with 6 lines written on it in Jim's hand. I picked it up and it was a poem about losing Maxine. So I copied it down and I pasted that piece of paper in one of my spiral notebooks from Jim's classes, and I rediscovered it last year, not long before, 2 summers ago, when Ellen and I went to Dickey event at Reinhardt University in Georgia, and so Chris Dickey was there, and so I typed it up as you have here, and I gave it to Chris, and I said, here's the Xerox of my original handwriting and everything. And he said, I wonder what happened to that scrap of paper. And I said, I don't know. It's either lost or it's buried in the papers, I suppose, at Emory. But in any case, I saved it. And so it's a short little poem, 6 lines with a rhyme scheme. All 6 lines rhyme with it. One of them is a consonantal rhyme, or off rhyme. She died in October. She must descend first, somewhere vague and cold, spirit and seal. I love that phrase. Her gift descend and all that warm heart fail. Somewhere, imagination one's one friend cannot see there. Both of us at the end. Nouns, verbs do not exist for what I feel. I want to say a brief word about my notebooks. Because I was habitually unemployed, I went to more than 500 of his classes, long after I could take it for credit. And I took meticulous notes. And I remember one day Skip Eisenmenger said to me, "Did you save your notes?" I said, "Well, of course I did." He says, "Because you wrote down every word." He said, "Well, I tried to." And this is one of them. And now, the class notes of his that were published by USC Press, edited by Don Greiner, they didn't seem to know much about the origin of those notes, but I do. When I first came back to grad school in '72 after being in the Army, he was tape recording his lectures, and his secretary, Paula Goff, was typing them all up, and for 2 whole semesters, and so he ended up with a loose leaf binder that thick of those class notes, lectures, and he used those for his lecture notes for the rest of his teaching career, although he didn't refer to them that much. But I took the notes I have, and I want to see them published someday. In any case, I've been through the Greiner book and I've been through my notes. And these are all the poets that I have notes on that are not in the Greiner book, meaning there's no other record of James Dickey's opinion about these people, except 2 or 3 of them are reviewed in his Babel to Byzantium book. Here's the list, and you'll recognize most of them. John Berryman, Hart Crane, E.E. Cummings, Richard Eberhard, David Gascoigne, Robert Graves, Robinson Jeffers, David Jones, D.H. Lawrence, Robert Lowell, Marianne Moore, Kathleen Rain, Herbert Reed, Theodore Recke, Carl Sandburg, Wallace Stevens, Trumbull Stickney, Alan Tate, Robert Penn Warren, Richard Wilbur, William Carlos Williams, James Wright, and Eleanor Wiley. And over at Reinhardt, where Ellen and I were, I read that list, and Chris said, "Well, is there anybody that's not on your list?" I said, "Well, no, there are plenty of them. They're in the Greiner book." So, thank you very much. One other thing I wanted to say about Jim's workshop teaching. I didn't have that many notes from the workshop, naturally, because they're about obscure poems by obscure students, but over the years I realized that Jim never went through a student's poem that didn't find something good to say about it. And he might say, "Keep these 2 words and throw the rest away," but he always found something good about it. And that's remarkable, especially if you read the criticism in Babel to Byzantium, boy, he can be savage. Thank you.
Later today, of course, the Last Wolverine is something that kind of stuck with me. But a while back, a fellow by the name of Bill Thiesing had asked if some of us would be willing to contribute to the James Dickey newsletter and to write a poem about Dickey, inspired by Dickey. So here's my poem called Upon Being Eaten by a Bear. She does not understand that what lies on the ground welcomes her, nor does she understand longing for vessels that cannot find the sea. There is no need for mist or timber or silent creeks hidden under the squelch of fallen leaves. There is no need for prolonging the fight. As the claw picks its way past sky and bone and the zodiac pulls me under, I am spread from ear to chest. My breath is her breath, and her breath bleeds. So much of it, our dance, held under the padding of knocking hearts, has little to do with instinct. And then my poem, which is sort of a response, I think, to Dickey, as I talked about a little earlier, when we stopped talking about the weather. This country has a limited vocabulary, call it rural, full of foul language, tracks dug in with more fences to ride, more horses to break. It's full of itself. When you were wild, you learned real fast that the secret to being a pony is survival. You believed the rope was a miracle and learning to let go was just enough to discover God. But no matter how much you want to climb, the dust and sage and granite won't let you go there. No God, no heaven dotted in crystalline patterns, just heat and sand gone too far. This place won't die easy, only in bits and particles and stories braided in tongue. The forest becomes a field, the field becomes a plot, a fire, an escape, a chimney left standing, a finger poking a hole in a blue sky, then rain. It's the myth of dreams. Flooded pastures will never fill with snow. It is the dirt road, its path rutted and forever. It's the frontier descending into pine and sparkleberry, fractured in the fall. It is the suit you'll be buried in, a thicket, a briar song, a mouth full of honey and dirt, a drift, a rattle, the damp silence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to bring up a poet named Vera Gomez next. Vera is a poet based out of Greenville, South Carolina. She's an award-winning poet, has got her poems published in numerous magazines. So please put your hands together for Ms. Vera Gomez, originally from Texas. And she's going to read a Dickey poem and then a poem influenced by Dickey.
Everyone's doing good today? Yeah, good. I'm originally from Texas and been calling South Carolina home for 26 years. I was not raised on a diet of Dickey, but have read Dickey. And really, back home, I would say I love his economy of language and what we call his being macho, which means talking about things just directly. And like Dickey, I write a lot about the land and the places I'm from. So in rereading some of his work in the last couple of months, I kept coming back to the same poem, which I just find endearing, and it's called Pursuit from Under. Do you guys know it?
That's a fabulous poem.
It's a beautiful poem, and it reads, Pursuit from Under. Often, in these blue meadows, I hear what passes for the bark of seals, and on August weekends, the cold of a personal ice age comes up through my bare feet, which are trying to walk like a boy's again, so that nothing on earth can have changed on the ground where I was raised. The dark grass here is like the pads of mullocks going on and on, Because I once burned kerosene to read myself near the North Pole in the Journal of Arctic Explorers, found year after death, preserved in a tent, part of whose canvas they had eaten. Before the last entry, all over my father's land, the seal holes sigh like an organ, and one entry carries more terror than the blank page that signified death in 1912 on the ice cap. It says that under the ice, the killer whale darts and distorts, cut down by the flying glass to a weasel's shadow, and when, through his ceiling, he sees anything darker than snow, he falls away to gather more and more force. From the iron depths of cold water, his shadows dwindle, almost to nothing at all, then charges straight up, looms up at the ice, and smashes into it with his forehead to splinter the roof, to isolate seal or man on a drifting pierce of the floe, which he can overturn. If you run, he will follow you under the frozen pain, turning as you go, zigzagging, and at the most uncertain of your ground will shatter through and lean and breathe frankly in your face, an enormous breath smelling of fish with the lungs straining your air. You know the unsaid recognition of which the explorers died. They had been given an image of how the drowned dead pursue us. They knew as they starved to death that not only in the snow, but in the family field, the small shadow moves. And under the bare feet in the summer, that somewhere the turf will heave and the outraged breath of the dead, so long held, will form unbreathable around the living. The cows low oddly here as I passed a small bit in shape going with me, trembling like foxfire under my heels and their hooves. I shall write this by kerosene, pitch a tent in the pasture, and starve. So, in response to Dickey, I realized I had a poem that talks about a place that's similar to me in a different way. And it's called Leaving Lamesa, which is a small town in West Texas. Let it be said, there's nothing nice about Lamesa. Here the dirt devils chase you until dust fills your mouth and tumbleweeds shear as they prick your thighs and run you down the road, propelled by the winds that always howl. Even at the start of spring, nothing grows but the rust on the water tower, stoic sentinel of marching bands and Friday football before the cotton mills closed. Let us not forget Lamesa's dying. The old timers calcified like the stacked tableau the abandoned town sits on, dry and bitter. The first time Edward Moreno kissed me, his mouth infused with tequila. When I was 9, Perry showed me love by giving me his favorite dead horned toad nestled on a bed of cotton balls housed in a cracked plastic Crayola box. I could not wait to grow up and leave, to take to urban life and fast-paced jobs, to stand alone and gaze upon a city skyline and night haze, longing for what stars look like against black, endless space, or dirt dancing in wind gust, or boys displaying love in strange, small ways. Thank you.
I'm actually going to read a poem myself. I'm Kimberly Sims, and I do have a little page on Facebook called Carolina Poets, and we just try and share all the poetry events and publishing opportunities that we find across the Carolinas on that page. And so if you ever want events shared on that, or if you want to like us on Facebook, Carolina Poets, it's kind of a good way to just kind of build some community between Columbia, Greenville, Charleston, and all those great poetry things that are happening in North Carolina as well. So, of course, being connected to Clemson, I have to read The Bee, which is a great poem that Dickey wrote in tribute to his football coaches at Clemson University, but it's also just a great poem where you kind of see his interest in how the personal narrative and history kind of meet together, and kind of this kind of cyclical nature of being in the past and in the present kind of at the same same time. So this is called The Bee. To the football coaches of Clemson College, 1942. And as a parent, this poem speaks to me as well. One dot, grainily shifting, we at roadside in the smallest wings coming along the rail fence out of the woods. One dot, all of that green, it now becomes flesh crawling, then quite still of stinging. I must live faster for my terrified small son. It is on him, has come, clings. Old wingback, come to life. If your knee action is high enough, the fat may fall in time. God damn you, Dickey, dig. This is your last time to cut and run. But you must give it everything you have left. For screaming near your screaming child is the sheer murder of California traffic. Some bee hangs driving your child blindly onto the highway. Get there, however, is still possible. Long live what I badly did at Clemson, and all of my clumsiest drives for the ball, all of my trying to turn the corner downfield, and my spindling explosions through the 5-hole over tackle. Oh, backfield coach Shag Norton, tell me if you never yet have told me to get the lead out. Scream whatever will get the slow motion out of middle age off me. I cannot make it this way. I will have to leave my feet. They are gone. I have him where he lives, and down we go, singing with screams into the dirt. Son screams of fathers, screams of dead coaches turning to approval, and from between us, the bee rises, screaming with flight, grainily shifting, riding the rail fence back into the woods, traffic blasting past us unchanged. Nothing heard through the air conditioning glass. We lying at roadside, full of the forearm prints of road rocks, strawberries on our elbows as from scrimmage with the varsity. Now we can get up, stand, turn away from the highway, look straight into trees, see. There's nothing coming out, no smallest wing, no shift of a flight grain, nothing. Nothing. Let us go in, son, and listen for some tobacco, mumbling voice in the branches to say a little better. To our lives still hanging by a hair, there is nothing to stop us. We can go deeper into elms and listen to traffic die roaring like a football crowd from which we have vanished. Dead coaches live in the air, son, live in the air, in the ear, like fathers, and urge. They want you better than you are. When needed, they rise and curse you. They scream when something must be saved. Here, under this tree, we can sit down. You can sleep. And I can try to give back what I have earned by keeping us alive and safe from bees. The smile of some kind of savior, of touchdowns, of fumbles, battles, lives. Let me sit here with you, son, as on the bench, while the first string takes back over far away, and say with my silentest tongue, with a man creating bruises of my arms, with a live leaf, a quick dead hand on my shoulder, Coach Norton, I am your boy. I just love the rhythm of Dickey. You just like get all that list going. So great. So I'm going to read a poem of my own. This kind of an experimental poem. It first appeared in Phantom Drift. Also kind of playing this intersectionality of the personal and history. And so this is called Bees of Light, A Cult Leader Touches Us. I grab for you, brother, but you dive over the edge into the lake. You remain subsurface as I lecture about karma and the cardinal. How he was exiled with a following so strong that stars, politicians were sucked in as Dad was, with a nod of the head. Your voice is shadowed below the surface of our crimped fabrications. But George Cardinal was well over 2 billion years old when Dad met him in 85. He came to believe misalignment could snuff out his soul. Remember when you astral projected as a child? That feeling of being everywhere must be leathered behind your eyes. I tried to follow you into space. Stretched it out around us like an airplane blanket, not ever wanting to come back to this reality of silence. Let's escape through a hole in time, be reincarnated as bees of light. But your face emerges out of the lake, slick and dripping. You open your jaws, rolling out a wet yarn, thick as a golden fleece. Dad's single dimple flashing as you turn up your palm to heaven. We are going to bring up one more reader. We're very lucky to have the Poet Laureate of South Carolina here, Ed Madden, so let's give him a big round of applause. Give me a round of Columbia. It'll be soon enough.
Poet Laureate of Columbia.
Columbia, that's my definition. Let's wait about 3 years.
So I'm going to read my favorite Dickey poem, which is Venom. It really is my favorite for two reasons. One, I love it when a Dickey poem gives you a word that you're totally not expecting. The word chattering in this poem blows me away. But the other thing about this poem is I think, and this is one of the things I like about some of his work, is that it's about the darkness. And it suggests that only by writing about our own darkness do we save ourselves. So Venom, and if you don't know the poem, it's about a man who had been bitten so many times by poisonous snakes that he donated his blood to people who had been bitten to help cure them. Venom. Forever it comes from the head. Where does it end? In lifeblood. All over it, in fact. The thrown off and thrown again light. There is little help for it, but there is some. The priest of poison, where is he? Who is his latest snake? How does he work? He has taken it all, brother, and his body lies with his hand in ice, in a lung of iron. But at last he rises, his heart changing, what the snake thought. Tooth marks all over him are chattering of life, not death, not what God gave them. He shimmers with healing. He will lie down again, with him the snake has entered. His blood will flow the length of the veins of both. They will clasp arms and double dream of the snake and the low, long, smothering sun. Look down. They stretch out, giving and taking. Clouds of family beat the windows of doctors with their breath. Here lies the man made good by 100 bites. It is not God, but a human body they pray to. Turn the poison round, turn it back on itself. Oh, turn it good. Better than life, they whisper. Turn it. They hammer whitely. Turn it, brother. So I've been writing a lot about growing up in rural Arkansas, and I'm just going to read one little short poem that's come from the stuff I've been working on. When I was a young animal. When I was a young animal, I learned by watching others, my father and the other men, my mother closing the door. The field smelled like a field. I didn't know that then. I could smell my young uncle on his hand-me-down shirts and pants, the buckskin coat with fringed sleeves, smell my grandmother's home when I tugged him over me, my young uncle, the one who showed me his dad's magazines. On the farm, we were a pack, the other cubs and me, roaming the dirt roads and fields, slinging clods at cars and one another, pissing on anything into the fire they built behind the shop to burn the trash, the small cans exploding in the flames. We were sunburnt, chigger-bit. Our mothers checked our skin for ringworms and ticks. I was a young animal. I learned by watching others.
Thank you, Ed, Poet Laureate of Columbia. I'm going to turn back over to Tom now for his instructions about jambalaya.